What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Touchdowns to Home Runs. My name's Bernie. Today, we're joined here by an extra special guest who's my buddy Hayden and possibly the biggest baseball expert that I know. Today, we're going to be breaking down the MLB divisions and each one of the teams in the American League. But before we do that, Hayden, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'm excited to talk about what's upcoming in the 2020 baseball season.
So obviously, coming into this, there was a lot of uncertainty on whether the MLB would even play or not, but they ended up deciding on a 60-game season, which is essentially in a regular season equivalent to an April and May, where we tend to see a lot of inconsistencies. So in your opinion, do you think this is a year for possibly a sleeper team to potentially really go far in the playoffs?
Yeah, I think there's huge sleeper potential, and for example, last year, the Nationals started through 50 games. They were 19-31, which in this year with only 60 games, they would have no chance making the playoffs. And they ended up winning the World Series.
Very true. All right, so the first team that we're going to cover is the American League East. And in my opinion, they're one of the biggest losers throughout this whole process because for half their schedule, they're facing their counterparts in the NL, which is possibly the toughest division in baseball. But the AL East really has a clear favorite, no?
Yeah, the Yankees are by far the best team. Signing Cole in the offseason was a huge addition to their rotation. And great bullpen, great lineup. There should be no reason why they don't win.
I'm looking up and down the lineup here. The only real uncertainty would be in the outfield with Gardner, Clint Frazier, and whether Hicks comes back from his injury. But do you see any real weakness or anything that could possibly hurt the Yankees besides injuries like they did last year?
Yeah, injuries have always been the big issue over the last couple of years for the Yankees. Maybe they need like a fifth starter because, some guys are dealing with COVID and some guys might just have Tommy John with the shorter season. But yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think the real question in the AL East then really comes down to who finishes second. And from everything that I've seen, it's tend to be in the Rays. Do you feel the same way? Do you have the Rays finishing second in the division?
I do have the Rays finishing second. I think they have two Cy Young potential candidates with Charlie Morton and Blake Snell. And they always have a good depth in their bullpen, and I think pitching will dominate this year. So I think they should be pretty comfortable the second seed.
So I have the Rays lineup here as well, and I'm looking through it. And for me, the big thing here about the Rays is that I don't know how good their lineup really is. Besides Meadows, they don't really have a true star. Does that?
Yeah, there's a lot of.
You think?
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty. With losing Tommy Pham as well doesn't help. And they have some guys like Teixeira and Ji-Man Choi and Willie Adames. Like, we don't know how they're going to perform. They're younger players, and you never know what to expect from them.
What about in their middle of the lineup? We have Diaz, Choi, Renfroe. Renfroe's a guy that they just acquired. Do you think they're an equally as good team as they were last year, even with the loss of Pham?
Well, I think it'll be tough to be as good as they were last year. I think they're slightly worse. They got younger. They're preparing for the future more with guys like Wander Franco and Brandon McKay coming up soon. So I think this year they might take a little step back from last year, but I think they should still be the 2 seed.
Okay, I want to come back to who's going to be the 2 seed in a second and focus on teams that could potentially sneak up there. And the first one here is the Boston Red Sox. Obviously lost Mookie Betts, but what do you expect from them in the upcoming season?
I wasn't too worried about them originally losing Mookie Betts. Like, I know it's a big loss, but I thought they still would have been fine. But then with Chris Sale and losing David Price, like their rotation, and Eduardo Rodriguez is dealing with COVID, they have no starting pitching. Like, their best starter is Eovaldi, who had a 6 ERA last year. And I think their lineup is still very good with Bogarts, JD Martinez, and Devers, but their pitching is just so bad.
Yeah, I think you hit that on the head. One thing that I did want to point out is that the Red Sox lineup and overall hitting stats, they were ranked number 1 overall last year. So even with the loss of Betts, they have Devers, Benintendi, a whole bunch of guys who really would have to take a step up for the Red Sox to be as good, but definitely capable of it. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right with the rotation. Eduardo Rodriguez, Eovaldi, and other than that, really a lot of uncertainty 3 through 5. So yeah, I definitely think that the Red Sox could be a good team, and I wouldn't at all be surprised. But yeah, I expect them to fall off as well. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, they should fall off. Now I think they have been pretty much guaranteed to be the 4th best team in the AL East. I think if they had Sale and maybe they were able to keep David Price and maybe their pitching would be good enough, but I just don't think you could have a team with Evaldi being one of your two best starters and be a top team in the American League.
Especially in a year with a shortened season where starting pitching is really going to be the big thing here, right?
Yeah, it should be, because starters should be able, in theory, go longer in games since they don't have to pitch as many innings this year.
You said that you expect the Red Sox to finish number 4, which means you're putting the Blue Jays at number 3, right?
Yes, I'm putting the Blue Jays at number 3. I think they're just going to be better than last year. They were a very young team last year. They should be better. They signed Hyun-Jin Ryu, who should be a good pitcher. His big issue is injuries. And in a shortened season, hopefully injuries aren't as big of a deal.
Okay, well, some people are going to think we're biased because people on the channel do know we're from Toronto. But I do want to say the Jays rotation here. It's Ryu, Anderson, Roark, Shoemaker, and Ryan Baraki if he's healthy. 3 of those 5 guys have had season-ending injuries. But as Hayden was saying, in a shortened season, that might not be an issue. Let's move to the lineup, though. Obviously, a lot of young guys. That's what the Jays are centered around right now. Their big 3, Bichette, Biggio, Guerrero. You also have Gurriel Jr., who's very young. What do the Jays have to do in terms of their hitting to be an AL East contender this year?
Well, to be a contender, to be up with teams like the Rays, I think Travis Shaw is going to have a huge bounce back year. I think he's going to, in a 162-game season, have to be on pace for 30-plus home runs, because I think they need another bat to compete with the Rays. I mean, Bo Bichette should be very, very good. I'm high on him. I'm not as high on Vlad Guerrero Jr., but he should still be a solid hitter and hit for some pop.
Talking about who you think could get hot as well, obviously we've seen Bichette, who got extremely hot when he just came up last year. But what about Cavan Biggio? He's a guy that we saw be extremely streaky. I have the Roto Champ up here, not extremely high projections. What do you expect from Biggio this year?
Yeah, same here. The projections are low for Biggio, but as you know, guys like that, young players always, they get hot for 1 to 2 months and normally slump for the rest of the year. So maybe those 1 to 2 months are in the first 2 months, or you just don't know. So maybe if Biggio is very good this year, like he was in September of last year, then they have a decent shot of being one of the top AL teams.
So obviously, other than the young core and injuries, the third outfielding spot is really, really a problem. The first thing is, do you think this is a year that the Jays make a move to sign that third outfielder or trade for the third outfielder? And then my second part of the question would be, do you think not having a solid third outfielder is what's going to be the downfall of them this year?
I think that could be a downfall for them. Also, I'm not so sure how important the third outfield spot is, but you look at teams like the Braves, who want to be a top team, and they had Nick Markakis say wasn't going to play, so they go out and sign someone like Puig. I don't see why the Jays can't sign people like that or trade for a player like that if they truly want to compete this year.
All right, so we got one more team in the AL East. It's the team that is really – nobody would be surprised at all if they finish at the bottom of the AL East, the bottom of the AL, really at the bottom of the league as well. I mean, there's really not a lot here when we're talking about the Orioles roster and some of the bright spots, but do you see anything here that could be a surprise, maybe for a fantasy owner, somebody that people might want to keep an eye out for?
There's not very much on this team. I would be shocked if they even can come 4th in the AL. I would be so surprised. John Means made the All-Star team last year, so maybe he can continue that. But, he really only made it because each team has to have one All-Star.
Okay, so for the viewers who are watching there, I'm just going to give a little background on sort of my next question. If you guys look at Fangraphs and some of the advanced stats on Chris Davis, you will see that he actually was not as bad as he was as his stats showed last year. And a lot of stuff and some of these advanced stuff show that he could have a bounce back year. Do you think Chris Davis could have a bounce back year?
Yeah, with big power hitters, normally they are streaky, especially guys that strike out a lot as well. So if he has 3 good weeks this season where he hits a couple of home runs, he's going to look like he had a really good season. So guys like that, they have potential to be very good, because if they had 8 home runs in 3 weeks, they're going to be one of the top players in baseball.
That's very true. All right, so before we move on from the AL East, I'm just going to get your final division predictions, 1 through 5 in order.
Okay, so the Yankees coming first, and I don't think it'll be close. Rays coming second. I think the Jays and Red Sox are close, but I would put the Jays third and the Red Sox fourth, and then Baltimore by a lot in last.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would do as well. All right, next up is the AL Central. We're going to start with the favorite considered by many fans out there, the Minnesota Twins. What do you see here?
I see probably the best power hitting lineup in the league. I don't know how many weaknesses they have hitting wise. Luis Arez is a very good young prospect that is going to play this year. And the rotation, they added Kenta Maeda and Rich Hill. So I think their rotation should be serviceable enough for this team to come first.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of good stuff there. I want to point out that right now, Miguel Sano is projected at the 8th spot, and even though he strikes out a lot, big home run hitter, and they really get power 1 through 9 throughout this lineup. And then obviously they added Maeda. Their rotation's looking pretty good, but it's really going to be their lineup that carries them this year, right?
Yeah, last year they were top 2 in home runs, and I don't see why that shouldn't continue. Like with Max Kepler, Jorge Polanco, one of the best hitting shortstops, Nelson Cruz, Josh Donaldson. Like they just have a ton of power on this team.
So a lot like the AL East, we have sort of a toss-up from what I've seen in terms of who people think are going to finish second, and that would be between the Indians and the White Sox. But let's focus on the Indians first. Obviously, the Indians weren't as good as people thought last year. What are your thoughts on what the Indians are looking like for 2020?
I think their hitting is a little underrated. Like they have Franmil Reyes, Domingo Santana, as well as their normal 3 guys, Jose Ramirez, Lindor, and Carlos Santana. I think people act like this team is like a bottom 10 offense in the league. I think they're more like average, and their pitching is going to be worse this year. I mean, they didn't really lose Kluber because last year he didn't do anything for them, but their bottom of the rotation might need some help. But they have 3 very good pitchers.
I completely agree with that. Carrasco, Clevenger, both being hurt in the past year, but Shane Bieber really took a step forward last year. I think he finished 3rd in the AL Cy Young, and then they got a few other depth guys here. So I think their rotation's looking pretty good, and yeah, I agree. I think their lineup is also underrated because a lot of people do have it at the bottom of the league. So would you have the Indians finishing second over the White Sox, or?
As of right now, I do. Although the White Sox, if Luis Robert is the player everyone's making him seem like if he's a Soto Acuna level type player, that would obviously push the White Sox ahead. But as of right now, I would have the Indians coming second.
Okay, so let's move on to the White Sox then, look at them more in depth. Obviously, you have your big guys. You got Anderson, Moncada, and Abreu, who's very underrated. They also added Grandal, Encarnacion, Jimenez. This is a very good-looking lineup that's starting to shape up here.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe the AL Central might actually have some good hitting teams this year because this White Sox lineup looks very good. Tim Anderson at over 300 last year, which not many people like batting average anymore, but he did have the highest batting average in the American League. And they added Grandal, Edwin, to their Eloy Jimenez and Jose Abreu, like some great hitters. And then there's the prospect of Luis Robert, which if he becomes very good like he's supposed to, they're going to be a very good lineup.
Before we move on, let's just look at the starters real quick. We have Giolito as the ace, but then 4 really uncertain starters. We're not really sure what we're getting. Is there anybody there that you're sort of thinking could possibly make or break the rotation, or is it just going to be average?
I think it's going to be, if they want to be able to pass the Indians, I think it'll also have impact on how well Keuchel and Raymundo Lopez does. If those 2 guys, if Keuchel can be like he was in, I believe, 2016, where he was very high in Cy Young, this could be a very top team because then they have 2 really good pitchers. But with only Giolito, I do like their bullpen, though. Their bullpen is good for depth, I would say, with Colomé and Bummer and Herrera, but their rotation just isn't up to the level it needs to be.
Very true. All right. Let's move on to the Royals. In my opinion, I like this team, especially for fantasy. They have, for me, I consider them like a tale of 2 coins here. They have some players who I consider very, very good, and then other players who are just not it, especially if you look at the bottom of this lineup. What do you think of the Royals?
Well, 1 through 4, their team is pretty good in their lineup with Merrifield, Mondesi, Soler, and Hunter Dozier. And then after that, it just falls off a lot. Perez is a good catcher, but like you have guys like Maikel Franco, Nicky Lopez, and Ryan McBroom. Like I don't think that, especially with the division they have to face in the NL Central, which I think is also a pretty good division. I don't see any way this team could make a push. The rotation is weak as well, and yeah.
The rotation is probably the worst in the American League, I would feel pretty confident saying. But before we move on from the Royals, I want to focus on Adalberto Mondesi. For the people who don't know at home, this is probably the fastest guy in the league, if not right up there. And he's a guy who has never, ever had a good OBP. But in a full season, this is a guy who could steal 60 bases. And I think that with a shortened season, with only 60 games, Mondesi is a guy who could definitely heat up and be a game changer with the way he runs the bases especially. All right, last team in the division, we have the Tigers. Not a lot of people very high on them this year, but they also do have some decent pieces. Well, one good piece, Matt Boyd in the rotation. What are you seeing from the Tigers?
Nothing really from the Tigers. You just have to wait for Casey Mize to come up next year, and hopefully he is a very, very good pitcher. Obviously, Boyd was good, but I don't know how long he stays with the team because the Tigers don't really like keeping around good talent. It's just a thing they don't like to do, but, it's whatever.
All right, so give me your prediction on the Central, 1 through 5.
Coming in first place will be the Twins. Coming in second will be the Indians. Third with the White Sox. Fourth with the Royals, and the Tigers will be last.
All right, I'll do the same thing. And we have now one final division, which is the West. And obviously, this offseason, we had a bunch of issues with the Astros. Personally, for me, I don't see a lot changing with them. Happened a couple of years ago. This is still a really good team, right?
Yeah, I think their lineup should be fine. Their lineup is still one of the best in baseball. And, maybe they're slightly worse, but the lineup might be slightly worse without them knowing what pitch is coming, but I think they are still a very good team.
The big guy I want to focus on here is Bregman. In my opinion, if people have watched the award prediction video, I have Bregman winning the MVP. First of all, is that something that you see could happen? And what do you expect from Bregman this year?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he won MVP. I think last year he was a top 5 player in the top 5 hitter in the American League, and if they prove that they can make the playoffs, and everyone's going to be watching them, and if they can prove they can make the playoffs without cheating, and Bregman is a top player and he hits 12, 15 home runs, he could easily win MVP.
For sure. And before we move on from them, let's just look at the rotation really quick. I see 3 really good starters and the potential for James to do really good. I know people were high on him last year, but really a bullpen guy. But this could be his year to sneak into the rotation as a 4 or 5 starter. Do you like their rotation?
Well, I think it's hard when you lose 2 very good pitchers in back-to-back years, Charlie Morton and Garrett Cole. I think their rotation is still solid. It's a little weak towards the bottom. I don't think that will matter as much in the playoffs, but in the regular season, maybe they lose a couple games that they shouldn't because they have Framber Valdez starting.
We haven't really focused on the bullpen yet, but I'm looking at the Astros bullpen here. They have some good pieces towards the top, but I don't see this as being a really, really strong bullpen. I know that they were looking to add some pieces at the deadline last year. Do you see that being sort of the case again this year?
Yeah, I think they have to add a lefty arm in their bullpen, a shutdown lefty guy, because their only lefty reliever is Blake Taylor. They have 2 very good relievers in Osuna and Presley, and after that, you don't know where you're going to get on a given year.
All right, let's move on to the second one. In my opinion, the A's could be a team that finished first in this division. They're sort of surprising the past year or so, but they really do look like a good team this year.
Yeah, they do. The reason why the majority of fans don't realize the A's are a good team is because what the A's do is they never pay anyone. So they always have young players that don't make a lot of money that are underrated, in my opinion. They're their 1 through 4 is very good with Semien, Laureano, Chapman, and Olsen. That's very good. Chris Davis had a bad year last year. If he bounces back to the 247 batting average, maybe they could be a sneaky team to come first in the playoffs or AL West.
That's completely right. And people forget also Sean Manaea was hurt last year. So this was a weak rotation, especially going into the playoffs. But one guy that I do want to focus on that, in my opinion, is underrated is Matt Olson. I think he hit, how many home runs did he have last year? He definitely had over 30.
Yeah, for sure.
But definitely an underrated guy in that 4 spot. In my opinion, Chapman, still an upper end third baseman. And then Semien obviously was in MVP talks last year. And they have a bunch of really, really solid players all around this lineup as well. Let's move on to the Texas Rangers after this. Looking at the lineup, a lot of guys who are sort of bottom in your fantasy draft, maybe if we're looking at guys like Solak. And then you got Gallo towards the top of the lineup. And then a much, much improved starting rotation. So what do you see from the Rangers here?
Yeah, the rotation, which is weird for a Texas team, I feel like is going to have to carry them. Typically, their lineup is good, and they hit for a lot of pop, but I don't – obviously, these guys can get hot. Like Gallo, Shin-Soo-Choo, Todd Frazier, those guys can get hot quickly and hit a bunch of home runs back to back to back. But their rotation with Lance Lynn, Mike Minor, Corey Kluber, and Kyle Gibson, those might be 4 very, very solid starters, including Kluber could have a bounce back year and get back to Cy Young potential.
Very true. And you also didn't mention Jordan Lyles at the bottom of that, but he's been a very quality starter for the Pirates in the past few years. I definitely know that. Is this Gallo's year to break out, given that he's a guy who could be on the upper end of the league in home runs, and in a short amount of time, could he break out?
Well, yeah, he can have a very good OBP in a shortened season because, like I've been saying this whole time, if you have 3 very good weeks, that's almost half the season. If you have an OBP over 400 in those 3 weeks, which is very possible, you'll just end up being one of the best hitters in the season. And any hitter is capable of doing that at an MLB level, especially one of Gallo's caliber.
It's true. One of the biggest moves in the offseason was Anthony Rendon going to the Angels. A lot of people also excited about Ohtani possibly finally playing a whole season. I know a lot of people are high on the Angels lineup. I don't like them towards the mid to the end of the lineup. You might feel differently. And I also don't feel like their starters are good enough yet. Do you think the same?
Yeah, their starters, they're definitely weak there. And their best starter, they're going to have a 6-man rotation this year. And so their best starter, I think, is Ohtani. And he's only going to pitch 1 out of every 6 games, if that. Their lineup 2 through 4 is very good with Trout, Rendon, and Ohtani, obviously. But as you get towards the bottom with Brian Goodwin and Andrelton Simmons, who's a great defender but not so much a hitter, and Jason Castro, it just falls off a cliff. And I don't know if they can be a very good team in the American League.
All right, so we got one more team to cover. We got the Seattle Mariners. Not necessarily a popular team, but they're looking a lot better than last year, in my opinion. I think Tom Murphy is definitely a guy who could break out at the catcher position. We also got J.P. Crawford, the young shortstop, Kyle Seager at third base. Rotation not great, again, much like the Angels. They're probably finishing at the bottom of the division, though, right?
Yeah, they probably are finishing at the bottom of the division, but they have some starters who are very young and you don't know what's going to happen with them, like Justice Sheffield and Justin Dunn. They could be very good. You don't know with these young guys, and if they have a couple hot months, they could have 2 very solid starters, and maybe things change. I don't think they will because their lineup is weak, but you never know.
And yeah, with the young arms as well, not as much as a concern this year in the shortened season. Let's flip to their bullpen really quickly. Haven't talked a lot about bullpen so far, but again, this is a really, really weak bullpen. And in my opinion, I don't think they can do much with this. And that's one of the reasons that I would have them at the bottom of the division.
Yeah, they don't have a very good bullpen. They are running 6 starters, so maybe they end up moving one of those starters back to their bullpen later in the year to help out. But yes, their bullpen is very bad, probably bottom 5 in the league.
All right, so AL West 1 through 5, go.
AL West 1 through 5. So I do still have the Astros coming first and the Athletics coming second, but I think they will be within 3 or 4 games. I think it'll be very close. Then I have the Rangers coming third, the Angels coming fourth, and the Mariners coming fifth.
Rangers before the Angels. I will go probably the Astros as well. I think that a lot of people just don't like them because of what happened in the offseason. So I'm going to go Astros, A's, Angels. Actually, yeah, I like the Rangers rotation. I'm going to stick with the Rangers 2 at 3, and then I'll do Angels at 4, Mariners at 5. All right, so before we end this, give me sort of your AL winner.
My American League winner for this season, I'm just gonna stick with the Yankees. I'm gonna be boring, but with their bullpen, as you know, playoffs normally starters go 5 innings. I don't know if that will change this year, but their bullpen is so good and their lineup is so good, and injuries shouldn't be an issue this year in a shorter season. So,
all right, I'm going to go with a different one. I'm going to say it's the Minnesota Twins. We touched on it. This is a fantastic lineup, and I like their starting pitching. I think it's gotten a lot better. It's not terrific, but I think it's just good enough. Compared to last year, it's improved, and I think that this is finally the step that they needed. Anyways, we are going to end that there. If you guys made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Extra special thank you to Hayden for joining us today for the video. We're going to be doing a part 2 for the National League at some point, so let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.